Imagine a world where the slave states claimed victory in the American Civil War. A different reality, a different history, a different America. The American Civil War, fought between 1861 and 1865, was a defining moment in the nation's history. It was the struggle between the Union of the North and the Confederacy of the South, a war that was about so much more than geographical boundaries. The conflict was rooted in a deep ideological divide over the institution of slavery. The North, increasingly industrialized and progressive, sought to abolish this practice, viewing it as an affront to human dignity and rights. On the other hand, the South, with its economy heavily reliant on agriculture, saw slavery as an essential part of their way of life. The war was marked by fierce battles, moments of despair, and acts of bravery. It was a time when brother fought against brother, and the nation was torn apart by its own internal strife. In the end, the Union emerged victorious, leading to the abolition of slavery and a new chapter in American history. At least that's the narrative we're familiar with. But history, as we know, is often a matter of perspective. The victors write the stories, the defeated are left to wonder what might have been. So let's delve into an alternate universe, a world where the South won the Civil War. How different would things have been? Would the United States still exist as we know it today, or would it be a series of small countries? Would slavery have endured, or would it eventually have been abolished? Could a divided North and South each have thrived independently? Or would they have been weakened without the other? Would the United States still have entered World War I? And how would this alternate history have affected Britain and the rest of the world? These are questions that can't be answered definitively, but they're worth exploring. They challenge us to think critically about the world we live in and the history that shaped it. But what if the outcome had been different? Indeed, what if? As we journey through this alternate timeline, prepare to have your perceptions of history challenged, your assumptions questioned, and your curiosity piqued. In this alternate reality, the United States would not be a united front. Imagine, if you will, a world where the stars and stripes don't fly over one nation, but over several smaller, independent countries. The Confederate States, victorious in their bid for secession, stand apart as their own sovereign entity. But what of the other states? Would they too have sought their own paths, fragmenting the once united country into a mosaic of independent nations? This fragmentation could have had profound implications on the political landscape. Without a centralized government, these new nations would be free to set their own laws and policies. But they would also lose the collective bargaining power that comes with being part of a larger entity. International relations could become a complex web of alliances and rivalries, with each state vying for its own interests. Economically, these independent states might have thrived or floundered depending on their resources and industrial capabilities. The southern states, rich in agricultural wealth but lacking in industrial infrastructure, might have struggled to compete in a global market. The northern states, with their burgeoning industries, could have emerged as economic powerhouses. But without a unified market, trade between these states could have been complicated by tariffs and regulations, potentially stifling economic growth. Then, there's the social consequences to consider. Without a federal government to enforce civil rights, each state could set its own rules regarding individual freedoms and equality. This could have led to a patchwork of societies, each with its own unique blend of cultures, values, and societal norms. Some states might have embraced progress and diversity, while others clung to outdated ideologies. In this divided reality, the notion of American identity would be completely redefined. No longer a united people, but a collection of distinct nations, each with its own distinct identity. It's a fascinating, if somewhat unsettling, thought experiment. Could these divided states have survived independently? Well, that's a question for another time. For now, let's just marvel at the complexity and diversity of this alternate America. Would the institution of slavery have continued had the Confederacy won? This question has intrigued historians and social scientists alike for generations. In our alternate timeline, where the Confederate States of America emerged victorious, the future of slavery becomes a complex and challenging issue. Undoubtedly, the Confederacy was built on the foundation of slavery. Its economy, social structure, and political ideology were all intertwined with this abhorrent institution. So it's conceivable that slavery could have persisted well into the late 19th and even early 20th centuries. However, the world was changing rapidly during this period. The Industrial Revolution was reshaping economies and societies, making labor-intensive agriculture less profitable and viable. Would the Confederacy have been able to resist these global trends? It's hard to say. Moreover, let's not forget the mounting international pressure. By the mid-19th century, most developed nations had abolished slavery and were increasingly vocal in their condemnation of the practice. Countries like Great Britain and France, with their global influence, would have likely exerted significant pressure on the Confederacy to end slavery. And then there were the internal voices of reform. Even within the Confederacy, there were those who opposed slavery on moral and economic grounds. Their voices might have grown louder over time, leading to internal reform. However, let's consider the flip side. What if the Confederacy, in an act of defiance, clung even more tightly to slavery? What if it became even more entrenched, shaping a society deeply divided along racial lines? This scenario, while disturbing, is not entirely implausible. And then there's the question of the enslaved people themselves. Would they have accepted their fate passively? Or would they have risen in rebellion, forcing an end to their subjugation? One thing is certain, the continuation of slavery would have had profound implications, not just for the Confederacy, but for the entire world. It would have altered the course of history in ways we can hardly imagine. What impact would this have had on the world? That's a question we'll delve into as we continue our journey through this alternate timeline. Could a permanently divided North and South have thrived independently? Let's delve into this intriguing possibility. Imagine a world where the North and the South are two distinct nations, each with its own economic and political trajectory. The North, with its burgeoning industrial sector, could have evolved into a powerhouse of manufacturing and innovation. Picture towering factories belching smoke into the sky as they churn out everything from textiles to locomotives. The North's economy, fueled by the relentless march of progress, might have thrived in this alternate reality. Meanwhile, the South, with its rich, fertile lands, could have remained an agricultural behemoth. Vast plantations of cotton and tobacco might have stretched as far as the eye could see, their produce shipped to markets around the world. In this scenario, the South's economy might have been heavily reliant on these cash crops, a dependence that could have brought prosperity but also vulnerability to fluctuations in global commodity prices. But what about international relations? The North, with its industrial might have sought alliances with other industrialized nations, forming a network of mutual economic benefit. The South, on the other hand, might have looked to form bonds with countries that had a high demand for its agricultural exports. This divergence in international relations could have led to a complex web of alliances and rivalries, reshaping the geopolitical landscape in ways we can only guess at. However, there are challenges to consider too. Could the North have sustained its industrial growth without the raw materials from the South? And could the South have survived without the manufactured goods and technological innovations from the North? Could these nations have navigated the choppy waters of international politics without the unity that we know today? These are tantalizing questions, ones that we can only speculate on, but one thing is clear. A permanently divided North and South would have set the stage for a fascinating tale of two nations, each pursuing its own path, yet inexorably linked by history and geography. Would these nations have been able to sustain themselves? As we continue our journey into this alternative history, let's keep this question at the forefront of our minds. Would the United States still have entered World War I? This is a question that has intrigued historians for years. Imagine a world where the United States as we know it never existed. Instead, we have two separate nations, the North and the South, each with its own priorities and agendas. Now cast your minds back to the early 20th century, a time of global unrest and conflict. The Great War is underway, but would a divided United States have been involved? On one hand, the North, heavily industrialized and economically prosperous, might have felt the pull of the global stage. Its manufacturing potential could have been a decisive factor in the conflict, providing much-needed resources to the Allied forces. However, the North may also have been reluctant to get embroiled in a war that seemed distant and unconnected to its own interests. On the other hand, the South, largely agricultural and still grappling with the ramifications of its own civil war, might have chosen to stay out of the global conflict. Its focus would likely have been on internal stability and economic growth rather than overseas battles. Both nations, though, would have felt the impacts of the war. The economic strain of global conflict, the human toll, and the changing political landscape would have reverberated across the Atlantic. Would they have eventually been drawn into the fray, or would they have continued to watch from the sidelines? The absence of a united American front in World War I could have dramatically altered the course of the war. Without the combined military might and economic support of the United States, the outcome of the war could have swung in favor of the Central Powers, reshaping the geopolitical landscape in ways we can only imagine. So, we return to our initial question. Would the United States still have entered World War I? The answer is we simply don't know, but what we can infer is that a divided United States would have significantly impacted the trajectory of the war. How would this have shaped the world as we know it? How would the North's loss have affected Britain? A tantalizing question indeed. To unravel this, we need to first look at the historical relationship between Britain and the United States. From the Revolutionary War to the War of 1812, the relationship between Britain and the United States was marked by conflict and tension. However, by the mid-19th century, a shift was beginning to occur, with Britain gradually recognizing the United States as an emerging global power. Now imagine a scenario where the slave states won. This would have created a ripple effect on the international scene, with Britain at the center. The Confederate States, with their agrarian, slavery-based economy, would have been a major source of cotton, a commodity crucial to Britain's textile industry. This could have created an economic symbiosis, pulling Britain closer to the Confederacy and potentially straining its relationship with the industrialized North. Politically, a victory for the slave states would have posed a dilemma for Britain. On one hand, Britain had abolished slavery in its own empire in 1833, a full 3 decades before the American Civil War. Aligning with a confederacy built on slavery could have been seen as a step backwards, a contradiction to its own moral stance. On the other hand, the economic allure of the Confederacy's cotton could have been too strong to resist, creating a complex web of political and economic considerations. In terms of international relations, Britain's alignment could have had serious implications. Aligning with the Confederacy could have sparked tensions with other European powers, particularly those opposed to slavery. Conversely, siding with the North could have risked economic repercussions. It was a delicate balancing act that would have required careful diplomacy. In conclusion, a Confederate victory would have created an intricate tapestry of economic and political challenges for Britain, possibly altering its trajectory on the global stage. What would this mean for the British Empire? A question that invites contemplation and underlines the interconnectedness of historical events. What would this alternate reality look like in the modern day? Imagine a world where the United States is not a singular entity, but a collection of independent nations. This could mean a North America more akin to the European Union, with separate currencies, varied laws, and distinct cultural identities. In this alternate timeline, the cultural landscape would be drastically different. Jazz, a product of the African-American experience in the South, may have never existed. The same goes for rock and roll, blues, and hip-hop. These genres, born out of a unique blend of African and European traditions, could have been lost in a world where the South was a separate nation. The global political stage would also look very different. The United States, as we know it, has been a significant player in global politics since the early 20th century. But what if it was a fragmented group of nations? Would the North and South have been allies or rivals? The ripple effects on international relations are almost too vast to comprehend. The technological advancements we've seen in the last century may have also taken a different course. The Silicon Valley boom, the creation of the internet, the space race, all these could have played out differently in a divided United States. On the societal front, the civil rights movement may have never taken place, or it could have been a much more tumultuous battle. The fight for equality could have been a cross-border struggle, with the North and South forging separate paths. And finally, consider the state of global economics. The United States is a major player in the world economy. However, the economic policies and power dynamics between a divided North and South could have led to a drastically different global economic landscape. We can only speculate about these alternate realities, but it's a fascinating exercise in understanding our history and its impact. As we've journeyed through this alternate history, we've encountered many hypothetical scenarios. We've delved into a world where the slave states claimed victory, leading to a fragmented United States. We've speculated on the persistence of slavery and pondered over the fate of two nations, North and South, each treading its own path. We've imagined a World War I that unfolded without the United States and considered the implications on Britain, a key global player. In this thought experiment, we've also projected these alternate outcomes onto the canvas of the modern day, painting a world starkly different from the one we know. But remember, these are mere speculations, exercises in critical thinking that allow us to reflect on the interconnectedness of historical events and their profound impact on our present. While we can never truly know what might have happened, exploring these what-if scenarios allows us to better understand the world we live in today.